Hello, I'm Nico. Welcome to the channel. This is the third video in a series of videos going over everything you need to know about Operator and how to use it. The first video covered what FM synthesis is, and on the second video we covered everything you need to know about how Operator itself works and all the parameters and everything like that. And in this video we're going to be just sort of exploring Operator and seeing what sounds we can create, so hopefully you guys will get some cool practical ideas that you can then go forward and experiment yourself and build upon them to make your own sounds. Now, this is only one YouTube video. I can't cover everything, obviously, and most of these sounds are just going to be me kind of messing around to see if I can make anything good. If you do have any questions about making a specific sound or just anything to do with Operator, definitely leave it in the comments and I'll try to help if I can. And I should point out as well that when you're learning a synth like Operator, for example, it can be really, really useful to kind of limit yourself only to using that one sort of tool, being Operator, and not branching out and using any external devices or plugins as much as you can. And that way you kind of learn the synth's limitations and also its strengths and, you know, its weaknesses. And then once you have that knowledge, then you can start branching out and sort of bringing things in externally that are going to kind of bring the best out of whatever you're working with. And sometimes thinking of cool ways to sort of work around the weaknesses that something might have is a lot of the time actually where you make your most interesting sounds and ideas. So just keep that in mind. In this video, we will be branching out a little bit, but when I do that, I want you guys to kind of think, why is he doing that? Is there a weakness in Operator or something that Operator can't quite do that these external tools are helping with? So the goal of this video is not to give you guys just a bunch of presets that you guys can use in your tracks or something like that. I mean, I guess we probably will be doing that, but the main goal of this video is get you guys to actually sort of learn how Operator works and how you might start going about making your own sounds and like that sort of just process in creating your own new sounds. And hopefully this will like shed some light on that process. And then hopefully you'll just be able to start practicing making your own patches from scratch and hopefully making some really, really cool sounds that people haven't really heard before. So if you watch the first two videos, you obviously know how FM works and all that. And Operator is actually a very, very versatile synth, in that it not only does it do FM synthesis very, very well, but it also does subtractive synthesis pretty good as well. So when you're recreating a sound or you have a sound in your head that you want to make, generally as a starting point, it's a pretty good idea to know whether or not you're going to be mainly going down the subtractive route or the FM route, and that's going to determine which algorithms you pick. Now, you could also do it the other way around, where you pick an arbitrary algorithm, not really knowing what you're going to make, and then depending on how that algorithm is sort of laid out, maybe that's going to give you different ideas in how to make a new sound, or it might even give you a whole new idea for a sound. So maybe instead of letting the sound you're going to make define the algorithm that you're going to choose, maybe let the algorithm define the sound you make. I know I'm rambling on a lot, but one more note though, aspects of sounds that are mainly up to personal preference, like note value routings or velocity routings, for example, which we went over in the last video. I'll probably gloss over that and not even really mention it for most of the sounds unless it's hyper specific to the sound we're creating. So just bear that in mind. If you want to recreate some of these sounds, maybe you'll also want to play around with the velocity routings or whatever, or dive into the matrix and make it even more sort of fancy. All right, so let's just start off with making the most basic sound that we possibly can with Operator, and that would just probably be the basic subtractive type of sounds. So generally you'll want to stick to this algorithm on the right here. This means there's no FM happening at all. All our operators are going directly out the output. For subtractive sounds, generally you want to start with a harmonically dense waveform like a square or a sawtooth, and then generate movement using a filter. Just to demonstrate that in its most basic form, we choose a saw wave, and then enable the filter. And we could route the filter with an LFO. Maybe disable the key tracking here. And maybe use a bandpass instead. I've got like a kind of sculpty thing going on right now. Now let's just make this into like a basic saw wave pluck instead of what we have going on here. So go to a low pass filter. Enable the envelope. So that's a saw wave pluck. We can also add some spread. And then after we add the spread, we could add a utility at the end and then mono it back down. So what we're doing here is we're spreading the voices, so we're generating more voices and they're slightly detuned with the spread knob, and then we're monoing it back down, so those slight differences in the pitches of those voices, instead of sounding wide, are now going to just sound like a mono signal, but it's going to start sort of flanging and giving us some phase cancellation. And you'll definitely be able to hear that if I increase the length of this envelope. So the difference without the mono, just a really wide saw pluck sound. Now it's a phasey one. I'm just going to delete this utility. And if we play a little arpeggio type thing here, bring this decay down. I might re-enable the key tracking so it's a bit more sort of coherent. So that's a basic sort of saw wave pluck sound. But what if we wanted to be a bit more clever and make the same sort of thing, but with FM algorithms? Well, we can definitely do that, and it's definitely got a different type of vibe. It definitely takes a little bit more thought though, so let me just talk you through it a bit. So I'll just reset my operator here. Just playing sine waves. Now we're going to need to change our algorithm. So I'm going to pick the basic FM algorithm, so every operator is just going through the next operator. The idea here is we're going to start stacking operators to do some FM, but how do we get this sort of saw wave vibe? Well, there's two things that really go into making that sort of buzzy saw wave sound with FM. The first one is, at least for your first couple operators, try using an odd ratio. So, you know, for example, 1 to 1 or 1 to 3 or 1 to 5. So let's just test that out. Now I'm going to just max out every envelope to start off with. Let's start off with 1 to 3. It's obviously not saw wavy yet. What I've found that generally helps with making this kind of sound though is for the next operator, you can pick a number that's close to the operator beforehand. So if you pick 3, you could either pick 2 or 4. And this is generally what gives the sound the sort of buzzy nature that a saw wave kind of has. You can hear it's more buzzy. And if we go back down to 2, it's also kind of buzzy, but just a little bit different. And then for the last operator, we could either do the same sort of thing. So we could pick a chords value of 5, or we could also do another odd ratio. So For 4, it could be 4 to 7, or it could be 4 to 9, for example. Let's just see how 4 to 7 sounds. Yeah, that doesn't sound too bad. Now what we can start doing is like mess around with the phases, and there's no real science to messing around with the phase values. As soon as you change one slightly, it's going to change the tone of everything quite a lot. So basically you just have to mess around until you like the sound of something. And you can do that on every single operator if you really want to. That's not too bad. Okay, so now we've got our general sort of tone of our sound going on. Now we can mess around with the envelopes. And the really cool thing about doing it this way with FM rather than subtractive is, as you can hear, we just have immediate access to like a million different tones. And just by changing the decays of some of the operators slightly, or the phases of each one, we just have access to so many different possibilities. Keep this last one fully maxed out. And we can even go a step further and actually go into each oscillator and mess around with the harmonics contained in each one. And this is basically when we add a new harmonic in the oscillator window, we're essentially adding a new operator. If you think about it, because all operators are sine waves, right? And by doing this, we're adding new sine waves. So you can think of it as kind of adding an extra square onto this diagram, which is really cool. So if you ever hear someone complaining, oh, operator's so crappy, it only has 4 operators. Blah, blah, synth in the 80s had 5 operators. Yeah, well, operator has 64 plus 64 plus 64 plus 64 plus 1, which is the LFO operators. Just bear that in mind. A really powerful way of thinking about operator is thinking about all of these sine waves in the oscillator section as separate operators. So let's just mess around with adding a few different sine waves here. Maybe we'll add a new one, maybe the 4th harmonic. Yeah, that's nice. Leave this one as it is. Another thing we can do is we can get creative with the mod wheel routings. So if we go into the global tab here and we go to mod wheel, maybe we could route the time value to the mod wheel. That might be interesting. So if we go to time and then go to 100%, I bring the mod wheel up, it starts getting more release. That's pretty neat. And maybe we could add a second routing to the tone, and maybe we can do the reverse of that. So maybe when it gets really releasey, we're going to bring the tone down so it'll get more sort of muted, but there'll be more release. That could be interesting. So we'll go to the negative. So now we have 2 completely different tones just by a sort of tweak of the mod wheel. We've got a bell that crossfades into a pluck. Oh, that's pretty neat, but maybe all the way to minus 100 is a bit too much. Bring the spread up. I think that's pretty cool, actually. Maybe on top of this, we could add a delay. Maybe we could add a pitch envelope as well. Got that nice little sort of attack to it now. Which is really helping when we go all the way to the sort of muted version with the mod wheel. We still have that sort of brightness of the pitch envelope coming through. And now the other thing about this pluck sound is that we can also go back to the actual ratios of our operators and change it from a saw wave sounding thing to more of a square wave sounding thing. So if I change this first coarse value to 2 and then leave the 4 and then change this top one to 8, you're going to hear it's going to change from more of a saw wave thing to more of a video game kind of square wave sounding thing. So yeah, this is why I love FM synthesis. Yes, it takes a little bit more effort to create the sound initially, but once you have the sound, you can get lots of different tones just by slightly changing parameters, and you just have immediate access to a lot of different things. We could tweak this sound for years if we wanted to, but let's move on. So what if we, instead of creating a pluck sound, what if we wanted to create a more slow attack, sort of brassy sound? So maybe something like you hear in movie trailers. Now that's going to be pretty much the same sort of recipe here in terms of our operators, because it's going to be a saw wave type sound, but we're going to need completely different post-processing and envelopes and everything like that. So I'm just going to delete this delay, remove the pitch envelope, disable for now B, C, and D operators, and start with getting our envelope right. Yeah, that's good enough. And maybe we'll bring the sustain down slightly and then bring the decay up a bit. Now if we add operator B and then copy that envelope from oscillator A, that might actually be a bit too much, because we obviously have got these other sine waves going on. What if we get rid of those? Yeah, that could be alright. Now what if we add C? Get rid of these for now. And copy the envelope from B. And maybe we'll just bring the attack up slightly. So they're just a little bit offset. Now you'll notice when I change the level of these operators, the sound you hear actually kind of lags behind what we're doing with this knob. That is because of our decay value actually. So for whatever reason, if you have a decay of 5 seconds, for example, when you tweak the level on that operator, it's going to take roughly 5 seconds to actually change to whatever level you put it on. So that's kind of annoying, but that's the way it works. So not quite 4 seconds, but yeah, it definitely takes a while. And then what if we add the last? See, our decay here is 55 seconds, so it's going to take a long time to sort of refresh. So if we bring that down to 1 millisecond, it's going to be instantaneous pretty much. Now we can do the same trick from the start of the video with the spread, so we could bring the spread all the way up. What if we go down an octave actually? Yeah, that's good, that's good. If we had a utility, and then mono everything, we're going to get some interesting phasing. We could tweak the amount of phasing just by changing the spread knob. It's kind of almost a really 80s feeling synth vibe, which is really cool. Now, what we can do from here is utilize the filter section to create some distortion, because remember, the shaper is linked to the filter. So the downside of the shaper, or the saturation, distortion, whatever you want to call it, is it is linked to the filter. So if you have the filter disabled, you cannot use the distortion, which is kind of annoying. And when you enable the filter and it's on low pass mode, the highest cutoff is actually 18.5 kilohertz, which is actually super noticeable, which is also annoying, because if you only want to access the shaper, but you don't necessarily want to change how the basis of your sound is sounding, that's kind of really annoying, right? But we can get around that, because if we change this to high pass instead, the lowest value we get is actually 30 hertz, which is a lot better, because it'll only ever be going below 30 hertz with like really, really, really super low sub bass. So it's not really going to affect the high end in the same way as if we're on the low pass, but we still have access to the shaper. And if you're really paranoid about the hyper low end, you can just change it to the 12 dB per octave version. That's going to be even less of a change down below. So, and now we have access to the shaper without much of a change to our sound. We'll try out all of them, see which one we like the most. Oh, that's really good. That's really brassy kind of sounding. So yeah, I definitely like MS2 the most for this sound. One thing I actually really like with this type of sound is Ableton's dynamic tube distortion. What this does is it asymmetrically shapes the wave. If you've ever actually heard a trumpet or any sort of brass instrument, they have a kind of asymmetric waveform. If you've ever seen the waveform in audio format, you'll notice that the waveform is actually quite asymmetrical. So this is kind of ideal for that sort of thing and generating brassy kind of sounds. So we need to increase the drive. Might bring this down a little bit. Might actually put this after the utility. This bias knob is basically how asymmetric the waveform is going to end up. Now it's pretty messy at the moment. Maybe we could add some ensemble. It's almost kind of like a neuro bass, isn't it? That's kind of interesting. Maybe if we duplicate the dynamic tube. And then add some reverb. Maybe a smaller room will be a bit better. Quite like that one. Maybe we'll have two reverbs, one small room and then one a bit larger, with the dry wet down a bit. And we can just tidy it up at the end with an EQ here. And the really cool thing is, because it's FM, we can go back to the synth after we've added all of our post-processing, and just by tweaking the values slightly, we get heaps of different tones. So we can go way too much. And maybe we can add the LFO to modulate the level of one of our operators. So maybe operator D here. So we get a more evolving sort of movement to the sound. Okay, moving on. Why don't we try make a kind of whistle type lead, maybe like a kind of flute style thing. So first off, we need to think, what constitutes the sound of a whistle or a flute? Well, if we're going the flute direction, it's mainly a sine wave with little bits of little overtones here and there, mainly in the sort of initial part of the sound. And then as it decays away, you're left with basically just a sine wave and maybe one or two harmonics, depending. But then you also have the sort of breathiness to it, right? So we need to think what algorithm is going to best suit our needs for that. I've got one in mind, which would probably be this one. So if I look at this algorithm here, the second to last one, maybe we can use operator C here as our main sine wave, a few harmonics here and there to get the sort of tone of a flute, and then use oscillator B or A to create the breathiness of it. So I'm going to bring down the level of A here, and we're going to start with oscillator C, and we're just going to get the envelope characteristics of a flute, I guess. Now let's try get the tone of the flute happening. So if we go to oscillator D, I'm just going to play around until I find a ratio that sounds kind of like a flute, right? So if I copy envelope from oscillator C and then just bring the level up a bit. No, I don't really want the amount of harmonics to increase as this attack stage happens on oscillator C here. I more just want the harmonics to stay sort of static until the attack's finished, and then it sort of tails off with the decay phase. So if I bring the attack to max here on oscillator D and then just have a look at our attack and decay. So that's 154 milliseconds and 123 milliseconds. If I just add those together and then make that the value of our decay, roughly 280 or something like that, right? So if I just bring the decay up to 280-ish, yeah, 75, whatever, and then I bring the sustain down. It's kind of fluty already, but if we scan through these ratios, maybe we'll find one that actually sounds like wood. That's very fluty, isn't it? It's more like a pipe. So it's getting more metallic as we go higher here. I think I like actually 1 to 2. And we just tweak the decay. Yeah, I think where we had it, it's pretty good. Now for the breathiness, a good thing for that is usually just white noise. So if we click on not the noise looped, because that's going to be more digital sounding, we want this to be a realistic kind of sound. So we'll go noise white and then bring the level up to so it's going to be a breath. So it's not going to be instant. Be more like that. Okay, that's sounding alright. One thing I don't like though is the noise has quite a wide bandwidth, if that makes sense. Like it's going from quite low to quite high. It's taking up a lot of the frequency spectrum. So we could add a filter here and then put it on high pass. And if we just play middle C and then bring the cutoff point down to where we can hear the note that's being played. So now we're cutting off all the noise that's below 283 Hertz. And as we climb further up the keyboard, since we have key tracking enabled, that cutoff point is going to move up with the notes. And we could also go into oscillator C and then add our own little harmonics, maybe the third harmonic. And how does that sound further up the keyboard here? That's not too bad. Maybe we can use the LFO to create a sort of tremolo kind of effect, because a lot of flute players, they don't play a static volume level, it kind of oscillates. We just route it to the overall volume here. could also introduce some vibrato here as well. Maybe even just like 1% would be good. And add some reverb just to put it in a space here. Now we could map the mod wheel to LFO amount. Put it on 100 here. So mod wheel down is going to be no vibrato. Bring it up, it's going to increase that sort of vibrato and tremolo. And then we could also change the pitch bend range of the pitch wheel. So maybe we only want to go up and down by 1 semitone to get that sort of fluty kind of sound when we go. And you could tidy it up with EQ and stuff and all the usual things. Okay, next sound. Maybe we could do a sort of mallet sound or a chime kind of thing. Something interesting that we could do is maybe have a sort of delayed thing. So every note you play is 2 separate notes, one after the other, that are sort of separated from each other slightly. So what algorithm would be good for that sort of thing? If we have a look, we have this sort of square one here where we have 2 separate chains of FM that are completely separated. So that might be a good starting point. So we're going to have oscillator A and B is one chain of FM, and then oscillator C and D is another chain. So let's start with oscillator A and B. So we just want to get this sort of mellety, maybe chimey sound. So for a mallet, you're going to have more sort of woody tones, and then for a chime, it's going to have more metallic overtones. And all that really means is you want to scan through all the coarse values until you hear a sound that's woody or metallic. There's no real science to it. I mean, well, there is, but you can definitely overthink things like that, when in reality, all you really need to do is just scan through and find the right sound. So maybe let's start off with making something that sounds a bit more woody, and then we'll change it to something that sounds a bit more metallic. So I'm just going to tweak this envelope. It's kind of like a mallet, I guess. Go down an octave. And then we'll copy the envelope from oscillator A. And then just scan through until we hear something that sounds like wood. Well, that already sounds like wood, I guess. That sounds like wood as well. Starting to get a bit more metallic, almost like a tube or something. Now we're getting into metallic territory, so it's more like a chime. So as you go higher and higher, you get more sort of emphasis on the higher harmonics, and that's generally something that metallic sort of surfaces do, I guess. So we'll start off with this. We could even add a second oscillator in here. Now we can go to oscillator C and D, and maybe we can just do the exact same stuff but offset it an octave. So we'll have all the same ratios and stuff, they're just an octave higher. The way we do that is we just right click and copy everything from oscillator A, and then go on oscillator D and then copy everything from oscillator B. And then instead of 1 here, we'll go 2, and then instead of 2 here, we'll actually go 4. So this should sound an octave higher than the other 2 oscillators. Yep, and it does. Now how do we delay the 2 sets of oscillators? Well, if you remember from the second video in the series, you can actually do that exact thing by using these initial values and the peak values. So if we bring the peak all the way down and the initial down too, now you can see we actually have this movable attack like starting point. So now if I enable everything here, it's going to be slightly delayed. Actually, I'm doing it on the wrong envelope here, so bring the sustain up and initial down. There we go. That sounds alright, but obviously the issue is we don't have access to sustain and all that now in this envelope because we've already used it to max out this stage of the envelope. So how do we get the second set of oscillators to follow that same sort of envelope shape that these bottom ones do? Well, if you remember, we actually have an extra envelope, and the pitch envelope doesn't actually only have to be routed to pitch, it can be routed to other things. And we can actually route it to the volumes of individual oscillators. So if we route the pitch env to oscillator volume C here, and then make everything mid, so it's all flat. Now we can actually shape the amplitude envelope of oscillator C. Bring the sustain down and the release. And we can increase the spread. Add some reverb. Now if we want to make this more metallic, obviously we just bring these ratios up a bit. So maybe instead of 1 to 2, we get a million different tones now, which is just the amazing thing about FM. Alright, what about a sort of jazz guitar kind of sound? Let's have a look at our algorithms. So there's two main aspects to a guitar, I guess. There's the sort of tone of the string, and then there's also the sort of the attack of the pick hitting the string. So we probably want to have an FM algorithm that has two separate chains happening. Maybe this third algorithm here. So we have one sort of chain that goes from D to A, and then another one that goes from C to B to A. So maybe we can use the left-hand side here to generate our tone. So C to B to A will be generating our tone, and then we can use A to D to generate the sort of pick attack sound. So just like all the other sounds, I'm going to start off by just tweaking the amplitude envelope on our first operator to follow the general shape of what we want the sound to be like. If you think about a guitar, you sort of pluck it and then there's a long-ish sustain, but eventually it fades out to almost nothing. So if we bring the sustain all the way down and bring the decay up to a long value, like maybe 30 seconds. A bit less than that, 25 seconds. Yeah, something like that. And then we'll just bring the sustain up slightly. And then for oscillator B, this is where we're going to start generating our tone. Bring the sustain all the way up just so I can hear what it's doing. I'll just scan through until I find something that sounds roughly like a guitar kind of sound. So this sounds almost like a bass guitar, but not really a jazz guitar. That's pretty guitar sounding, I guess. So if we bring the sustain down a bit and the decay up. Now we can just build on that by copying everything over from oscillator B. Bring the level down. I'll set the decay a little bit. That sounds kind of like a guitar, I guess. Now let's work on the pick aspect of it. Now for this, if we just like maybe find a really, really high ratio and then just make the attack really, really fast with no sustain, it might just add the exact amount of attack that we actually need. So I bring the level up here. And maybe you could even detune this a little bit. Make it like sort of inharmonic. Actually, maybe if we bring the attack down and bring the initial up and then bring the attack forwards, that might be a better solution here. Yeah, that sounds all right. And we'll add the LFO just for a vibrato kind of effect here. And maybe we can utilize the envelope on the LFO as well, so that the vibrato is not happening all the time. Maybe it slowly comes in as you hold a note down. So maybe over the course of a second, or maybe even 2 seconds. And we could even add a cabinet. And there's a trend in this video, reverb makes everything better, so we'll add a reverb, maybe a small room kind of thing. Yeah. Now what about a bell kind of sound? Well, bells are actually like really, really easy with FM. You can basically choose any algorithm you want, as long as the sort of ratios you choose are kind of inharmonic. So if you choose a 1:6 ratio, for example, if you just tweak the fine tune a little bit so the harmonics aren't exactly right, they're kind of a little bit off, and then you tweak the sort of envelope of that offness with the envelope and that operator, you can create some really realistic sounding bells. So I'm just going to pick an algorithm at random here. So maybe this one. So oscillator A is going to be our main sort of sine wave. So if we just make a bell-like envelope. Yep, like that. And then maybe for this one, we'll go an octave up here and we'll copy the envelope from oscillator A. Now if we copy the envelope again into oscillator C, and we'll change the coarse value until it's got the rough sort of tone that we want. It's very bellish, but it's a little too perfect, right? So we just tweak the fine tuning a little bit. It sounds a little bit weird now. That's just because we need to tweak this envelope a little bit. And we'll do the same sort of idea with oscillator D. Copy the envelope from oscillator C. Now, even though this ratio here is a nice and perfect one, we're actually modulating an oscillator that's not perfect. So by definition, in relation to oscillator B anyway, this is still going to be a odd sort of ratio. Well, that's very belly. But we could tweak the fine tuning of this one too. Now keep in mind these fine-tuning values, if we have it on 0 and then we go all the way up to 1000, this isn't going from 13 to 14, That's actually going from 13 to up to like 20 something. It's just the way that operator's laid out, so just be aware of that. Actually, just keep it on 0 for now here. We're gonna bring the spread up a little bit. It's a very realistic sounding bell in my opinion. Bring it up an octave, more of a chime kind of thing. Even lower, it's like a tube. And obviously, reverb. If anyone ever tells you, stop putting reverb on everything, it ruins everything. Don't listen to them. For sound design purposes, the right type of reverb at the right amount can really take a sound from sounding dry and not in a space to sounding exactly like it was recorded in a room or something. Don't ever worry about that. As long as you maybe bounce it down to audio or whatever when you're done with your sound design session, just be aware that if you're to use these sort of patches in an actual track and you had a million different operator patches with all different convolution reverbs and stuff, it is going to spike your CPU. That's the main downside. But for sound designing purposes, and if we were just to resample this down and record it down, it's totally fine. So if we maybe change this to chambers, large rooms. And then just maybe bring the size down a bit. The difference with the no reverb here sounds very in your face and just sort of synthetic, even though the harmonics are sounding right. It's just there's something weird about it. But if we just even bring the dry wet up to like 1%, it's going to make a big difference in terms of putting it in that space. Maybe 1% was a bit of an exaggeration, but yeah, 20%. Really makes a big difference there. And the benefit of making a bell with operator here, instead of using a like sample of a bell or something, is you can much more easily play this on a keyboard with the operator patch. It's going to sound much more natural and realistic than if you were to add a bell sample to a sampler device or whatever, because you're not sort of pitch shifting the original note. Now why don't we make something interesting like a riser? Well, risers are pretty simple. All you need really is some white noise, usually. So for this, maybe we'll use the looped white noise. So this changes depending on the note I play. And we could pitch this up with the pitch envelope, put everything to mid here, and bring everything maxed. Now, that is a basic riser, like it's a riser, I guess, but we can make it a bit more interesting. Maybe bring the spread up. And then add a high pass filter, which is key tracked. So make sure key tracking is on here. And bring the cutoff down. And then maybe we can utilize the envelope here so that the cutoff of the high pass slowly goes up. So be something like this. Bring the envelope amount up. So our attack is taking 19.6 seconds to reach the top of the modulation range. So if we bring the attack here to 19.6 seconds, everything should line up perfectly. It's a pretty basic riser, but we could make everything a little bit more interesting here. So maybe we could add some reverb. Maybe we'll add a convolution reverb and then use one of the experimental impulse responses. What does this one sound like? Could bring it 100% dry wet. pretty insane. Maybe we could also add a phaser. And then instead of having the LFO on, maybe bring the amount down, and then bring the notches up, maybe to like 7 or something, and then pick a starting point here. Like that, and maybe we can just automate this upwards. So I'm going to go into a note that I've just recorded down, and then bring it from 191 hertz up to maybe up to 2 kilohertz here, and see how that sounds. Yeah, pretty good and very low effort, which is cool. Now, if you really wanted to, you could put a little bit more effort in here and make your own noise instead of using the looped white noise. So if we turn the looped white noise off, just put it on sine here. I'll disable these effects for now, just so we can hear what we're doing. It's just going to be a pitch modulated sine. So if we change our algorithm here, we'll just go on the most complex FM one here, and then change this waveform to a more complex waveform, maybe like a square. Maybe we'll go down an octave. And then just layer heaps of complex FM on top. So we'll change this one to a saw. And just pick random chords values. That's all I'm doing here. It's going to sound really harsh and disgusting at first. We're getting some noise there. If we change this to a saw. But we're getting heaps of really, really cool like fold back artifacts and stuff, which is really cool. Makes it sound a bit more complex. And we'll go saw, no, maybe square wave. Keep in mind, this is not effects, this is literally just operator now. And then we can add our effects again. So kind of similar actually to our original, but it's just slightly different. But if we bring these like levels down a bit, we're going to get more of the character coming through of the FM. So there's the idea behind that. Now, another thing Operator is actually really good for is subs, because we have access to these different harmonics, right? And we can change the phases of those harmonics. So it's really, really good for shaping a sub. So if we just have one single sine here, it's just going to sound like a sine wave, obviously. Already sounds like a sub, but we can get it way, way, way more fatter sounding. I think Mr. Bill did a video on this actually, which is probably where I've actually got the idea from. So we have the one sine wave here, and we can bring a second sine wave in. So we're just on the normal subtractive 0 FM algorithm. And now we get a sine wave that's twice as loud. But if we get rid of this first harmonic and maybe only draw the third one in, and our envelope, make sure it's maxed out, and then tweak the level. You can see here on the oscilloscope, it looks fatter, but it also sounds fatter. So if I just play a few notes and then disable it, just sounds a lot fatter. And we could also add another harmonic, so maybe we could also add maybe the 6th harmonic. And this is going to make it really audible on like small speakers and that. And maybe you could add this harmonic on another oscillator instead of both on oscillator B. So if we add that onto oscillator C here, so we just want the 6th harmonic here, which is going to be this one. And if we change the phase of the 6th harmonic, we can get it to sit in our waveform a lot nicer. And you get, oh, that's sounding a lot better now. So depending on where the phase is, it randomly gets a lot fatter sounding, even though the tone is kind of the same. That makes sense? I try not to use my eyes, I just have this on here for a visual representation. That's sounding quite fat there. Same with there. So yeah, operator, really good for shaping your subs. All right, why don't we try make like one of those really nasty rolling dark wave bass lines. I've found for this kind of sound, generally I just stick to algorithm 1, maybe branch out a little bit. I kind of just experiment until I have a sound that I like, because none of these sounds are exactly the same, right? And they all have their own unique sort of thing going on. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to sort of find the initial sort of amplitude shape that I like, and then experiment to find the tone. Copy everything over. Copy over again here. Oh, that's nice. And maybe on oscillator D, we can do the same sort of envelope, but we'll go crazy on the quartz value here. Make it really kind of metallic or cone filtery. Now, maybe we can change the sound of this over time a little bit by using the LFO. So maybe instead of having the LFO on the pitch of things, maybe we can have the LFO on maybe oscillator D here. Bring the amount up so we can just hear what's happening here. And I'll bring the rate all the way down, and then bring the re-trigger off so it's going to be free running. So no matter what I'm doing with my hands on the keyboard, the oscillator is not going to re-trigger every time I play a note here. So now every time I play a note, we get a slightly different tone. Bring the amount down, it's not as insane. Now we can do that trick where we enable the filter, but only just to gain access to the shaper. So we'll put it on high pass mode here, and then maybe MS2 mode, and bring the cutoff all the way down. But we can actually use this high pass filter as a little bass boost as well. So if we turn the key tracking off, which is actually pretty important here, so 0, and then boost the resonance, you'll see it's got this little hump here, so we're going to be boosting the subs a little bit when we bring the resonance up. Especially if we bring the cutoff up a tiny bit. You can really hear it there, which is really nice. So we have access to the filter drive now, and so if we just bring that up quite a bit and then maybe put soft clipping on, maybe hard clipping. It's pretty fat sounding. I wonder what this will sound like with a little bit of a pitch envelope here. Yeah, it gives it a little bit more attack. That's alright, I guess. Filter drive might be a little bit too much. It's a bit cleaner. Maybe we can route the mod wheel to the tone. So we'll get more of just a sub when the mod wheel's all the way down. And then when we bring the mod wheel up, it's going to get more aggressive. That's pretty good. Maybe you could also do the same to the time. So when it gets more aggressive, the sort of envelopes open up a tiny little bit. So when we have the mod wheel all the way down and it's just the sub, it's a little bit tighter. But as it gets more aggressive, it kind of opens up as well. That's pretty cool. Now what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to add an effect chain here because I want to get kind of really particular about how I process the sound. I want to process the highs a bit differently than the lows, for example. So if we go in here and choose EQ, and then we add a low pass here, and I want this to be only the sort of sub region or the bass region. Yeah, something like that. And then now if I group this and duplicate the chain, solo the second chain. Now I want to change this filter from a low pass to a high pass. So something like that. So now this is only the highs. Okay. And the goal is to make it sound exactly the same enabled as disabled. So we don't want these two cutoffs to be affecting the sound at all. So we might need to bring them slightly closer together. Maybe we could actually bring this up here. Bring this one. Doesn't need to be exact as long as it sounds good. That's right there, I guess. So the beauty of this now though is we have this low end sound and this high end sound. We're able to process them differently. So all I really want to do with this high end stuff here is just make it a little bit wider. So the way we could do that is just by using a delay, basically. We add a delay here to solo this. And then unsync the times. Make it really, really fast. And then unlink the left and rights. And then we get a really wide kind of sound. This is kind of like a Haas effect type thing. And then if we add the bass back into it. Yeah, that sounds nice. Nice and metallic. That's all I really wanted to do with the high end there. So we'll close all this. Now we can add a compressor to the sound as a whole here. Bring the threshold down here. Bring the attack up a bit. Just want it to be a little bit more punchy. That sounds alright to me. Now, since what we've done with this compressor here is we've kind of made it a slower attack, which means the initial attack of the sound is going to be punching through a lot more than the rest of the sound, which means we have this sort of increase in dynamic range almost, which is good, but we can kind of get the best of both worlds by adding a saturator at the end on digital clip mode. And this is just going to like shave off those little peaks. We're basically trading those sharp peaks for more harmonics. But if we tweak it exactly right, we'll get the best of both kind of worlds. So if we just drive this, and bring the output down a bit. It's a lot fatter sounding there. Now, if I make this play a little kind of riff thing, how's this going to sound? I wonder. It sounds okay, but on those really aggressive sort of tones, it's sounding a little bit kind of flat. We've processed it a lot and we've lost a little bit of that dynamic kind of range. Maybe we could just tweak the sort of dynamics a little bit with Shaper. So if we put this on 16th notes, because that's what we're actually playing with this riff, that's the one there. And then we've got to add a utility, and then we got to map this. Actually, before you map it, put the max at 50%. That's where 0 dB on the utility is. So if you go all the way to 100%, you're going to be boosting up to plus 35 dB and your ears are going to get destroyed. So put that on 50% and map it to the gain here. And now we're going to get a much more dynamic kind of sound, but we're still going to retain all this kind of harmonic information. Obviously that's a lot. It's way too dynamic then. So if we just bring this endpoint up a bit. Yeah, that's a lot tighter in my opinion. Sounds a lot better. Alright, so I've just added some drums and stuff to this. And I'm just going to play around with the mod wheel as it plays. So hopefully it ends up all right. Let's have a listen here. Nice. That's pretty cool. Okay, let's go from that hyper aggressive dark wave sound to a really nice sort of electric piano. So for this one, maybe we can get the bulk of the tone of the electric piano using the oscillator window, so controlling the different harmonics and then tweaking the envelopes. And then we can add our kind of pluckiness of the sort of the tine sound. So each note has like a sort of metallic almost kind of quality to it with some FM. Maybe we can pick this square algorithm here again. So this has 2 separate FM chains. So hopefully the 2 separate FM chains are going to make the sound a little bit more like fleshed out. So if we just get our rough sort of envelope happening here. We can probably just get away with slight decrease in sustain and a long decay. And then I'm just going to go straight into tweaking the sort of tine sort of sound. So we'll go to oscillator B here. And we'll go really fast decay. Most of the metallicness you get in FM comes from higher ratios. So if we go all the way up to up here. So up here it's getting pretty harsh. That's kind of an electric piano, I guess. Pretty basic though. So we'll go back into oscillator A here. And then if you notice, we play big chords. It's just sort of one sine wave for each note, and it's kind of muddy sounding, especially if we go down an octave here. So maybe we can make it a little bit less muddy by adding some harmonics. something like that. And then we can fill out the sound even more, I guess, by going into oscillator C and doing our second chain of FM and then just copying everything over. So maybe we could just make everything exactly the same. So coarse value of 1, and then just change the fine tuning of this one slightly, and then we'll get some phase cancellation and beating, so that might sound interesting. Yeah, that sounds really cool, actually. Yeah, that's awesome. It's almost like a chorus effect. Excuse my crappy piano playing. And speaking of chorus, why don't we actually add some chorus? That might sound nice. And then just some EQ to control the sort of low end. And can you guess what we're going to add? Yeah, let's add some reverb. Maybe we'll go with the algorithm reverb here, and maybe, what does the shimmer reverb sound like on this? Whoa, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I like that one actually. It's a pretty nice electric piano kind of sound, I think. All right, I got one more example to walk through here. And this is just going to be a really creative way to use operator. I'm not trying to recreate any sound in particular, so maybe we'll just make some interesting generative sounds only using the subtractive algorithm here. So I'm pretty much just going to have a sine wave here, and then short envelope. And then I'm going to stack that with a bunch of other similar things. So if we just copy from oscillator A on all of our operators here, I'm going to tweak each one individually. So I'm going to go back to A, and I'm actually going to tweak this feedback amount. So what the feedback amount is, if you remember from the second video, is it basically just FMs the operator or oscillator by itself. So it's like it's literally a feedback loop of FM. And what that does on a just normal sine wave sound is it actually makes a nice saw wave. Except we can tweak it really nicely, and it kind of has almost this string quality to it. It's almost like a really nice low pass filter actually. And I'm just going to do that on each operator, maybe with different coarse values. And maybe we'll go to coarse 3 here. Only with a little bit of feedback on that one. And maybe for this one, we'll skip 4 and go to 5. And we'll go a higher feedback amount. Now, if we enable all these, sounds pretty nice. So this is another way you can get really cool sounds, is just by using the subtractive algorithm and then just layering different harmonics with different feedback amounts. And you get some interesting tones. But for this, actually, what I thought we could do is loop each one of these envelopes. So actually, we'll loop this one here, and we'll put it on loop mode. If I bring the release all the way down here, it's going to loop every sort of 1 second-ish, because that's how long our entire envelope is. But we can actually modulate the speed at which that loops. But to do that, we need to bring in an external LFO. So this is just the Max for Live LFO. So if we click map here and then map it to the decay length, you can see we start modulating the decay length. And we can make that modulation random by clicking on the LFO and going to random here. And then we can make the rate at which it changes to each random value a bit smoother, like that. And we can also change the rate at which it's changing and the range of the modulation. So if I just hold the note down here, so we don't want it to really go that kind of fast. Maybe we'll bring the depth down a bit. Bring the offset down. Yeah, something like this. This sounds a bit weird now, I know. Trust me, we're going to end up with something cool. So if we do that with each one of our oscillators with a separate LFO, so we'll just copy this 3 more times and map each one to each oscillator's decay value. Oh, we need to bring the release down for each of our other oscillators actually too. And we need to put each envelope on loop mode, obviously. Now we should get something interesting. We just get total randomness. But we could make that randomness a little bit more grounded, I guess, by using our pitch envelope, like we did with the mallet example. So if we just bring these down and we route this, instead of going to those pitches, we route it to the overall volume of the synth. We get this kind of like pluck sound, but it's random every time we play a note. I'm gonna volume up a bit. Can you guess what we're going to do now? Yeah, let's put a reverb on. Let's see. Don't you think that's cool? I think that's pretty cool. If we go even lower. Now, what's really cool is we can tweak the time value here. So if we want less of a sharp pluck for each looping envelope and more of a sustained sound, we can bring the time up. Well, we can have it really fast. I'm just holding one note down at a time here, so one note. Bring the time down a bit, play another note. And we can get even crazier, I guess, if we just use the convolution portion of this reverb here and then choose textures. This could be interesting. Maybe marbles. How does that sound? What about chains? Rolling rocks. Whoa. Bring in the algorithm portion again. Just get a million different textures here. We could try chords. I just find this explorative type of sound design really, really fun. So I'm just getting a little bit carried away here. But that's the idea. You can get really creative with Operator. Obviously, this video is already getting too long, but there's heaps of other stuff you can do with Operator. And I would urge you just to experiment. For example, you can make interesting digital sounding percussions. Hi-hats. Neuro basses. slap style bass guitars. Operator is actually really, really good for making snare drums. And I might make separate YouTube videos covering each of these things. Like for instance, snare drums probably requires a whole separate video to cover that. But with that said, I do have a Patreon where I upload heaps of exclusive content and sample packs and things like that. And maybe in the meantime, until I get around to making a proper YouTube video about these sort of things, maybe I'll make a little video about neuro basses and growls and snares and stuff like that over there in the meantime. So if you're interested in getting heaps of cool benefits for not much money at all and supporting my sort of endeavors here on YouTube, I would really, really, really appreciate you giving that a look for sure. And thank you to all my current Patreon supporters. You guys are amazing. You make it worthwhile to actually make these in-depth tutorials and videos. And I'll probably be uploading all of these patches that I've just made to my Patreon as well. So there's that. So that brings the operator tutorial series to an end, I guess. Let me know in the comments what you want me to cover in the future, and I'll see you guys in the next video.